The German Tiger I tank was a monster of its time, an armored beast that rolled onto the battlefields of Europe like something from another world. It was heavy, slow, and loud, but to Allied soldiers in World War II, it seemed almost invincible. Its armor could shrug off nearly everything the Americans or the British could throw at it. A single Tiger could destroy an entire platoon of Shermans before they even knew what hit them. But what most soldiers didn't know was that behind its terrifying reputation, the Tiger had a secret weakness. One so simple, so frustrating, and so absurd that when American tankers finally captured one of these feared machines, they could hardly believe it was true. It wasn't the gun. It wasn't the armor. It wasn't even the engine breaking down. At least not exactly. It was something more ordinary, something no one expected from Germany's most advanced tank. It could barely drive more than 120 miles on a full tank of fuel. To the men who'd spent months fighting this mechanical monster, that number was unbelievable. For them, the Tiger wasn't just a tank. It was a nightmare. Every Sherman crew that saw one would feel that chill down their spine. Its massive 88mm gun could rip through American armor at distances where their own shells just bounced off. And yet, when they finally got their hands on a captured Tiger, when they opened it up, examined it, and learned its secrets, they discovered that the great German war machine had an appetite that was destroying Germany from the inside out. But to understand why, we have to go back to the beginning, to the Eastern Front, to the swamps and forests of Russia, where the Tiger was born out of desperation. It was 1941. Operation Barbarossa, Hitler's massive invasion of the Soviet Union, had begun with thunder. Thousands of German tanks swept through the Soviet borderlands, crushing everything in their path. But then came something unexpected. The Soviet T-34. Fast, sloped armor, a powerful gun. It shocked the Germans. Their Panzer IIIs and IVs were suddenly outmatched. The German army, which had relied on speed and tactics, now faced an enemy whose armor and firepower outclassed everything they had. So in response, German engineers were ordered to build a tank that could destroy anything in its path, a tank that would dominate through pure strength. That project became the Tiger I. When it rolled out in 1942, it was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Weighing nearly 57 tons, its thick armor made it almost immune to the weapons of its day. Its 88mm KWK-36 gun, originally designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, could obliterate Allied tanks at over 2 kilometers away. Soldiers who first encountered the Tiger described it as if it were a living thing. Unstoppable, invincible, terrifying. Allied forces gave it nicknames. The Beast, the Monster, the King of the Battlefield. But here's the thing. The Tiger wasn't just heavy in armor. It was heavy in everything. It was a mechanical glutton. Its massive Maybach engine struggled to move its enormous frame. Every mile burned precious fuel. Every turn strained its gears. It was a machine built for power, not practicality. And the Germans knew it. But by then, they had no choice. The Tiger had become a symbol of power, of fear, of superiority. It wasn't just a weapon. It was propaganda on tracks. Still, to the men fighting it, propaganda didn't matter. The Tiger was real and deadly. In the hedgerows of Normandy, in the deserts of North Africa, and across the frozen plains of Russia, it left behind a trail of smoking Allied tanks. Stories spread like wildfire through the ranks. A single Tiger holding off an entire battalion. A Tiger taking over 200 hits and still returning fire. A Tiger that could destroy a Sherman before the crew even saw it. The legend grew, but so did the curiosity. How could something that powerful even work? What made it so strong? And most of all, could it be beaten? For American tank crews, the answer seemed hopeless. The M4 Sherman was nimble and reliable, but its 75mm gun could barely scratch the Tiger's armor from the front. To win, they had to flank it, outsmart it, ambush it, anything but fight it head-on. And yet, in late 1944, fate handed them a chance. Somewhere in the chaos of advancing Allied lines, a Tiger was captured, intact. The first true opportunity for American engineers and tankers to look inside the beast they feared for so long. What they found inside shocked them. The controls were cramped. The transmission was complicated. The engine, a Maybach HL230, roared like a dragon but guzzled fuel like 1-2. It took more than 500 liters just to fill the tank. And for that enormous appetite, the Tiger could only go about 120 miles before running dry. That meant every Tiger on the battlefield wasn't just fighting the enemy. It was fighting its own fuel gauge. To the Americans, it was both fascinating and hilarious. They'd been terrified of a tank that could barely move across a single day's battlefield without refueling. And yet, there was a strange kind of respect, too, because even if the Tiger was inefficient, it was still lethal. It didn't need to move fast. It only needed to appear once, fire once, and the fight was over. As one American tanker later recalled, you could hear that 88 before you saw it, and once you saw it, it was already too late. But the Tiger's fuel problem wasn't just a battlefield inconvenience. It was a national disaster. Germany was running out of fuel. Every Tiger that rolled off a production line was like a bottomless pit for gasoline. Gasoline that Germany no longer had. Behind the front lines, Hitler's generals were fighting a second war, a war for resources. Synthetic fuel plants, supply lines, convoys, all straining to keep the Tiger fed. And in that sense, the Tiger became a symbol not just of power, but a hubris, a machine too perfect for its own good. Because while the Tiger could dominate the battlefield for a few hours, it couldn't win the war for Germany. It was too big, too expensive, too fuel-hungry. And when American tankers finally realized that, they understood something deeper. That sometimes the greatest weapon isn't the strongest one. It's the one that keeps running. When the captured Tiger was hauled back to Allied lines, soldiers gathered around it like it was a fallen god. For months, they'd seen this beast from a distance, its thick armor glinting in the smoke of battle, its thunderous cannon echoing through shattered villages. But now, here it was, motionless, silent, and vulnerable. American engineers and tank experts wasted no time. They wanted to know what made it so deadly and what made it stop. They opened the hatches, climbed inside, and began pulling the machine apart piece by piece. At first glance, it was impressive. Every inch of the Tiger reeked of over-engineering. The inside smelled of oil, sweat, and hot metal, like a factory squeezed into a box. The interior was cramped, and the controls were overwhelming. Levers, pedals, and gauges filled the cabin. Everything was precise, but overly complicated. One American officer, after inspecting the driver controls, reportedly laughed and said, "No wonder they lose so many. You need an engineer's degree just to start this thing." But then came the real surprise, the engine and fuel system. The Tiger's heart, a 12-cylinder Maybach HL230, was powerful but temperamental. It could push the 57-ton monster up to 24 miles per hour on roads, but the moment it hit mud, snow, or uneven terrain, its speed dropped to crawling pace. And the fuel consumption? That was a shocker. At full throttle, it burned nearly 3 gallons per mile, an absurd figure even for wartime vehicles. With its massive 540-liter fuel tank, it could barely manage 120 miles on a perfect day, on perfect roads, with perfect conditions. In combat, it was often less than 80. To put that into perspective, American Shermans could travel almost 125 miles on just 170 gallons, roughly one-third the Tiger's capacity. That meant a Sherman platoon could move, fight, and keep going long after a Tiger had run dry. In other words, for every Tiger that reached the front, Germany had to haul enough fuel for 3 or 4 Shermans, just to keep it alive. And as the Americans soon learned, that wasn't even the end of the story. The Tiger's gearbox was fragile. Its suspension was complex. The interleaved road wheels, that iconic German design, clogged with mud, froze solid in snow, and took hours to repair. It wasn't a tank built for war. It was a tank built for show. But what made it truly frightening was that when it did work, it was unstoppable. During field tests, the Americans fired a Sherman 75mm gun at the Tiger's front armor. Nothing. The shells bounced off like pebbles against the wall. Even the British 6-pounder barely left a dent. Only the heavy 17-pounder, used on the Firefly variant of the Sherman, had a real chance, and even then it required a perfect shot from the side or rear. It was clear why soldiers had feared it. In real combat, the Tiger's psychological impact was enormous. Allied crews often panicked at just a rumor of one nearby. Commanders would reroute units, call in artillery, or even retreat, all because of a single Tiger. But behind the myth, the truth was far less glorious. In reality, for every Tiger that reached the front line, another one broke down before it even got there. Supply trucks constantly hauled spare parts and fuel. Mechanics worked day and night to keep them running. One German officer joked grimly, "Where there's a Tiger, there's a trail of oil behind it." Even so, when the Tiger worked, it earned its fear. In one recorded test after capture, American crews attempted to drive it, just to feel what it was like. They described the experience as unforgiving. The steering was stiff, the clutch heavy, the noise deafening. The tank rattled and shook like an earthquake. And yet, there was something mesmerizing about it. The sense of sheer force, of raw power under the hands of whoever dared command it. But while engineers were fascinated, tankers were practical. They realized that the Tiger's power came at a price Germany could no longer pay. Fuel, time, logistics. Every Tiger required constant maintenance, constant fuel convoys, and specialized crews. In comparison, American Shermans rolled off assembly lines by the thousands, simple, easy to repair, and fast. And here lay the irony that stunned every Allied soldier who studied that captured Tiger. The Germans had built a perfect killing machine, but one that was killing their war effort. It was said that by late 1944, Germany was producing fewer than 80 Tigers a month, while the Allies were producing over 1,000 Shermans. Quantity was crushing quality, and the numbers told the truth. A Tiger could destroy 5, 10, even 15 Shermans before being taken out. But there was always another Sherman waiting, always another crew ready to fight. The Tiger was magnificent, but alone. Meanwhile, German tank crews themselves had mixed feelings about it. Some loved it, calling it their guardian angel. Others cursed it. One veteran recalled, "We fear not the enemy, but the breakdowns." The Tiger could save your life one day and trap you the next. Captured records later revealed just how crippling its fuel consumption was. A Tiger battalion in 1943 used up 10 times more fuel than a standard Panzer IV unit. That meant every Tiger unit drained supplies that could have kept entire divisions running. And as Germany's fuel reserves dwindled, Tigers began being abandoned, not because they were destroyed, but because they ran out of gas. Crews blew them up themselves to keep them from falling into enemy hands. The Americans studying their captured Tiger couldn't stop talking about this irony. Here was a tank that had terrified half the world, and yet it could barely cross a battlefield without stopping for a refill. The discovery changed how they thought about tank warfare. It wasn't enough to have the strongest armor or biggest gun. What mattered most was endurance, how far a tank could go, how many could fight, and how quickly they could be repaired. It was a lesson that would shape future tank design for decades to come. The Americans took notes on everything: the armor composition, the gun's optics, the transmission layout, even the crew's positioning. Some of these ideas would influence post-war tanks like the M26 Pershing and later the M48 Patton. But they never repeated Germany's mistake. They kept their tanks reliable, not just powerful. Still, the Tiger left a lasting impression. Even its opponents respected it. The captured Tiger became a teaching tool, shown to tank crews before missions to remind them, this is what you're up against. But it's not invincible. And perhaps that was the most important realization of all. The Tiger's armor could stop shells, but not time. Its engine could roar, but not forever. In the end, the Tiger wasn't just a tank. It was a symbol of a nation trying to build perfection while fighting reality. It was strength without endurance, power without balance, fear without fuel. And the Americans who studied that captured Tiger left with a strange mix of awe and relief. Awe for the brilliance of the engineering. Relief that it wasn't theirs to maintain. They'd seen the beast from the inside. They knew its secret now. The same secret. The captured Tiger sat in an American testing ground, its steel hide gleaming under the sun, silent now, but still commanding attention. Mechanics, soldiers, and engineers walked around it. each one aware that this machine had once inspired terror on every front it touched. The question now wasn't whether the Tiger was powerful. Everyone knew that. The question was, had its power been worth the price? Reports from the field told the same story again and again. German units abandoning Tigers because they ran out of fuel. Entire columns stalled in mud. Crews stranded and forced to blow up their own tanks rather than let the Allies take them. One German commander wrote bitterly in his logbook, "We lose more Tigers to fuel shortages than to the enemy." It was a tragic irony. The most feared tank in the world defeated not by enemy shells, but by its own hunger. As American analysts studied the captured Tiger, they came to a striking realization. The machine represented everything about the German war effort, brilliant, intimidating, but unsustainable. The Tiger was a perfect mirror of a regime that believed in dominance through fear and perfection through excess. Every bolt, every plate, every curve on that tank screamed ambition. But ambition had limits. Behind the power, there was fragility. Every mile the Tiger drove drained resources Germany could no longer afford. Every time one fired, it needed tons of fuel, replacement tracks, spare gears, and hours of maintenance. The Tiger was not a tank for war. It was a tank for parades. A symbol of what the Reich wanted to be, not what it could realistically sustain. And yet, on the battlefield, symbols mattered. For the men on both sides, the Tiger was more than metal. It was emotion, fear, awe, and determination all wrapped in one shape. When American crews learned that this monster could barely travel 100 miles without refueling, it didn't make them laugh. It made them respect what they had even more. Their Shermans were smaller, lighter, and often underpowered. But they kept going, day after day, battle after battle. They crossed entire countries, fueled by a logistical network that never slept. The Americans had discovered the real secret of war. Endurance beats perfection. Still, the fascination with the Tiger didn't end. Captured units were paraded in Allied camps. Crews climbed atop them, posed for photos, studied their armor, and traded stories about how they had once feared this very machine. For engineers, it was a mechanical marvel. For soldiers, a fallen monster. In one memorable test, an American crew took turns firing different weapons at its armor, from rifles to heavy cannons, just to see what could penetrate. Almost nothing did. They ended up painting the impact points on the hull like trophies, marking where each round had bounced. The Tiger's armor remained unbroken, but its reputation, that had already been cracked open by the truth. As weeks passed, reports from the front confirmed what American analysts had suspected. The Tiger's logistical burden was crushing the German army. Even elite units couldn't move freely anymore. When the Allies bombed fuel depots and rail lines, Tiger battalions were immobilized, their steel beasts stranded and useless. And then came the winter of 1944, the Battle of the Bulge, Germany's last great gamble. Hundreds of tanks, including Tigers and Panthers, pushed into the Ardennes under the freezing snow. It was a desperate attempt to split the Allied lines and seize vital fuel dumps. Without that fuel, they knew the offensive couldn't last. For a few days, it worked. Tigers led the charge, tearing through the thin Allied front. Their 88mm guns thundered once more, reminding everyone that the beast was still alive. But as the advance slowed and Allied aircraft returned to the skies, the truth reappeared. Empty fuel tanks, broken gearboxes, and endless supply delays. By the end of the campaign, the once mighty Tigers were being abandoned on the roadside. Crews burned their tanks, buried their logs, and tried to escape on foot. The most feared machine of the war had become a monument to Germany's defeat. When American soldiers later examined these wrecks, many noticed the same thing. Perfectly functional Tigers sitting untouched, no battle damage, no destroyed armor, just engines out of gas. That sight told the entire story. No matter how strong the armor, no matter how big the gun, if a tank can't move, it's already lost. And that's the paradox of the Tiger Eye. It was the most powerful tank of its era, yet completely impractical for the war it was fighting. It was like a giant sword, beautifully forged, deadly in skilled hands, but impossible to swing for long. The Americans who had captured that Tiger back at the testing ground understood this better than anyone. They'd learned from it studied it, and respected it. But they also knew that their own path, simpler, faster, more reliable, was what would win the war. When the war finally ended, the tiger I became a relic. A handful survived, scattered across museums and memorials. Some still stand today, in places like Bovington, Saumur, and Munster, restored and preserved, their engines roar into life only for demonstrations. And every time that engine starts, it reminds those who watch of what it once meant. The ground trembles, the air fills with smoke, and that deep metallic growl echoes across history. For a moment, people glimpsed the power that once ruled battlefields and the flaw that doomed it. Because the Tiger was never just a tank. It was a story of genius and obsession, of strength and waste, of awe and irony. And maybe that's why the Americans who captured it didn't see it as a trophy. They saw it as a lesson, a reminder that technology alone doesn't win wars. People do. That reliability in numbers, logistics, and endurance will always crush perfection that burns itself out. Decades later, veterans would still talk about that moment, when they stood beside the captured Tiger and realized it wasn't invincible. It was human, flawed, beaten not by better weapons, but by a better plan. One tanker said it best. We thought it was a monster, but once we looked inside, we saw the truth. It was just another machine that needed fuel, and we took that away. And in that quiet understanding, the myth of the Tiger finally ended. The machine that had once terrified an army had become just another chapter in the long, brutal story of war, a warning to every nation that mistakes power for victory. So when history looks back at the Tiger Eye, it's remembered not just for its armor or its gun, but for its lesson, that the mightiest tank of World War II, the symbol of German engineering, the terror of the front lines, could only go 120 miles before its heart went empty. A monster built to conquer the world, but trapped by its own appetite. And somewhere in the dusty archives of history, that captured Tiger still stands. Silent proof that sometimes the greatest weakness hides inside the strongest armor.